Hey, today we're going to be talking about revising the code in my game. As some of you may know, the early access game was trite and there was a lot to improve on. And one of those improvements was the bugs in the game that either made the game like less fun to play because it stalled certain flows, or it was just unplayable and there were some game-breaking bugs in there too. So we're gonna look at that bit by bit. Also, wait, let me go close my window though. Okay, by the way, also, I just hope you guys don't think that this is a purely educational video or anything. It's just a devlog, so a blog. I just wanted to clarify that because I'm not so proud of my coding as I am of other things like designing and art and stuff. It's just a video for me to talk about my progress. A big reason of why I do this too is to see if anybody else can have a better idea of how to do everything. So again, please let me know. I love to talk to people, so anyway, thank you. I wrote things in a very messy and hurried way. It's something I have to go back and clean up every time, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that here too. And also to make sure that the engine executes code in the correct way, because as I've mentioned in previous videos, there is a difference between how the Unity editor executes code and how the actual build works. Like for example, if you have a bunch of update loops in your game, everything might be nice and chill in the editor, but there's no guarantee that a certain thing is going to be checked and then the code will execute in another script or something. There has to be like a good solid link between two scripts, which can be achieved through things like events, for example. Yeah, so the first thing I did was sketch out a diagram of how my code worked with each other. It's nothing super professional, but I just wanted to see how everything interacted with each other, roughly speaking. And I also wanted to see how many times I used the update loop. And I have symbolized that with a little dot next to the name of the script. And as you can see, I've used it many times. On top of that, the code was very repetitive, had a lot of specific cases, but the code repeated itself very much, and I could use, for example, one class that links all of the other specific cases together in a way, and we will talk about that soon. There are a couple of patterns and stuff that are very widely known. For example, the model view controller pattern, which I've used in the health bar script. So basically there's a controller class which links the model and view class together. The model basically takes care of the logic of a mechanic, and the view takes care of the view, and the controller just is like a port to communicate through and also to link these two other classes together through the use of events. So I basically made like a big list of all the big chunks of mechanic-y stuff that's going on in my game, and I started it off with the NPCs because I felt like that would be the easiest to start with. Going back to the update loops, I use that most often to check for keyboard input from the user, but there's absolutely no need for that since we have the new input system, and I used this time as an opportunity to learn more about that. I moved mostly everything from the old system to the new one because it's just easier to work with and there's no need for an update loop. But basically the reason I was using the update loop in the first place, just to check for the possibility of someone to press a certain key, was because I know there's some way to like link a key to an event, but in that case just use the new input system again. Or like I originally wanted to put those checks inside the on trigger enter and on trigger exit classes, but that only checks for something the moment the player enters that trigger, so there's no point in that. That's why I put everything in update like a dummy. Yeah, overall I made like 3 action maps. So the first action map that I created was player, but it only takes in account the NPC interaction button, which I made the E button. And then I have a separate action map for the DUDUK mechanic. That's for all of the different keys that you can press from the letter E to the letter P. Oh yeah, and then the last action map was made for the main menu. So like when you press the escape button, I made like a button for that. So back to the NPC script, because I noticed that every single NPC has this one thing in common, which is they all check for whether the E button is going to be pressed or not, and they all have a resting and active sprite state for when you enter their trigger and when you exit it. So I made one class specifically for that because there are a bunch of different specific cases and I wasn't sure how else to link the classes. I basically created an interface specifically for the interactable NPCs, and I linked it to those specific cases, and then in that main class I searched for a component that was of the type INPC interactable or whatever, and that worked perfectly fine, which is super awesome. I guess where the component pattern might come into play but not really is that I have a bunch of NPCs with different abilities. I guess one might be interactable, one might be just walking, and one might just be like playing a certain animation loop on the street or something, and one might just be stationary, which in that case there's no need for a script to be attached to that. And then there may be some NPCs that are both walking and interactable, or like walking and playing like a certain animation loop. So for that I separated 3 different classes that you can very easily attach to a certain game object to have like a nice amalgamation of the 3. So, and then we go to the DUDUK mechanic. I always pronounce it so weird, I don't know why. So obviously the mechanics need to be updated. They look so goofy and I'll be focusing on that in the next video, I promise. Yeah, the way that the whole like DUDUK mechanic works in general is, so there's a separate script that checks whether or not you clicked on that main button that turns on the visibility of those 8 little musical buttons, and then I have another script that animates the button pressing and stuff, and that's where the new input system comes in again, because I used to use the update method to check for that sort of stuff, which was super dumb. But anyway, I also have a DUDUK trigger script, which basically means when you get next to a certain interactable object, it has a trigger zone, and when you enter that trigger it will pass a code to you, and that's how the whole machine knows which exact code you're supposed to play to interact with that object. Again, once you enter its trigger it passes a code to you, and then you need to input the correct sequence of characters that will resemble that code. And you may be wondering, who exactly is it being passed to? That is where the scriptable object comes in. I use the scriptable object to check for, basically it's given the code, right? It sets a certain string to that code, and then it has one method that continually is passed characters every time you press a button on the DUDUK mechanic, and it adds it to another string, and then that string is compared to the code it was given. So each time that each specific character at that specific index does not equate to each other, then that string is reset, like it's turned blank again. And in the old script I had a horrendous way of checking that. It was absolutely horrible, and that's probably why I ran into the bug. People would have to input the like code several different times even though they were totally correct, and that's probably because that string within the method wasn't reset properly every time you inputted a wrong character. So again, if that didn't make sense, say the code is cat and you input the character C and then you input the character X. Say for example the string does not reset after that because X is not equal to A. They're both at the second index, right? But they're not equal to each other. At that point the string should reset, but it doesn't. And that happened a lot in the old code where that person would input the letter C again and then A and then T, and then at that part of the code they were totally correct, but because the string didn't reset it was at a completely different index than where it should have been. So I made everything a lot cleaner and I tested it out. I keyboard smashed absolutely, and it seems to be working now. And then you might also be wondering, why did I use a scriptable object and why didn't I use like a non-mono behavior class? That's because it's nice to have one big global variable that first of all is like easily attachable to any other script that you want, because with a non-mono behavior class you either have to declare a new instance of it or you need to reference it again in different ways, but that's just not as convenient as a scriptable object is. And it's also much easier to debug with a scriptable object because you can just serialize all those variables and stuff and see how it plays out in real real time while you're playing the game. And then there was this folder called DUDUK Interactables, which is those objects that you interact with, but I did not touch that, to be honest. Like, the code sucks for sure, but I haven't touched it yet because I jumbled it up with some other mechanic that I'm supposed to clean up. I'm gonna remember it and I'm gonna get back to it. Moving on to the inventory, I am scared. I haven't updated that either because in the next video I'm supposed to completely change the design of it because I hate the design of those mechanics now. But I can talk briefly about how I worked on the inventory. I don't know, just like simple OOP stuff again. I declared an inventory class which comprised of a sprite and a string. So the string describes what the inventory item is and the sprite just offers a visual so you can tack it onto the inventory bar on the side of your screen. And then I had the inventory handler, which was this massive method with like a switch statement that, for example, you pick up a fish, there's going to be a case called fish and that tells you how to like handle the case. Once you like click on it in the inventory, it's going to increase your health by a certain amount. What else do I have? Obviously I had like how the UI elements work themselves, the sub inventory scroller. Why did I call it that? But whatever. That just handled, you know, when you take an object, you should move all the objects upwards a bit or whatever. If there's already 6 objects in the list and you want to add another one, you can't because there's not enough space. Like, just like simple stuff like that. That's why I didn't touch that code again, because I don't know how the design's gonna look like for now. We'll talk about that in the next video. The main menu was ridiculous too. I removed that update method checking for each time the escape button was gonna be pressed. My main quarrel was with the checkpoints script because it was just handling too many things at the same time. I feel like it makes most sense for it to just be handling when you click on new game, you should do this. When you click on load game, you should do this. And I gave most of the like data handling stuff to the game manager itself. So then the game manager can look into the data manager to retrieve any information. On top of that, I also used that opportunity to debug for one thing. A lot of people have said that when you play the game and you've made progress and everything and you close the game and then you return to it, the load game option does not exist at all. So people thought that the game wasn't saving their progress at all, but in reality it was an even dumber thing. The game is totally saving your progress. I checked that in the build and everything. The problem is the way I'm checking for whether the loaded file exists or not. When you start a completely new game, I don't want the load game option to exist in the checkpoint screen because that's just logical, right? So obviously I needed some method that would check whether a loaded game already existed or not. But I was doing that in a weird way. I was checking whether this game data class existed or not by checking whether it was null or not. But it is never null because it is always set to some default value. I still don't know exactly how to check for it. I tried to do the whole like file path exists thing, but that didn't work either. But whatever, I'll figure it out. But if you might know yourself or you might want to help, please help. Oh yeah, another really stupid thing. It was very specific. Like, I found the answer to it on the internet like immediately. Some people found out that when you press the space bar, a new game loads, and I don't remember ever writing code for that ever. And it turns out it's just an issue with converting from the old input system to the new input system. So you're obviously gonna need an event system for handling UI. So if you have that issue too, just like click on the event system thing and it's going to have this button saying like change to the new input system or whatever. You just click on that and the issue is resolved. So yeah, I don't have that weird issue anymore. Yay! Okay, one thing that had me absolutely tweaking at like 12 p.m. in the afternoon on a Wednesday was the new input system again, because there's just something in my game that's messing with the way that events are triggered because of that input system. I don't know if that makes sense. If I stay within one scene without starting the game from the very beginning, like the credits and everything, then everything works totally fine. But when I start my game from the beginning and then I go and try to open a door like using my music and stuff, it doesn't work. Apparently you can only have one instance of it throughout the whole game. I feel like that makes sense. So you can manage all other action maps within the game instead of just like jabbing it in between lines of code in completely random other classes. I read somewhere that you're supposed to disable it or something, but anyway, I was fuming mad for like 4 hours straight today. So just to appreciate the beauty of the DUDUK, I was looking through some of my code and I saw the way I was trying to animate the most simple things using coroutines. Okay, let me just like add a video of how absolutely beautiful DUDUK is. To be honest, yeah, that's about it. I basically just cleaned up some code and fixed some bugs along the way. And now I have a new bug with the whole input system thing going on and everything. And I hope you guys pray for me. I'll get through it. Next video, there's gonna be a bit of like game design and a little bit of coding and stuff going on. I want to redesign the health bar, the inventory, that DUDUK mechanic. Everything just looks so dumb. I'm so sorry to myself, but like it just looks dumb. So I'm gonna try and find new ways of drawing everything out, firstly for aesthetic purposes, but also to make things more convenient for the player too, because like I said in my last video, they're on opposite sides of the screen and you need to access both pretty frequently throughout the game, and it just gets frustrating swiping from right to left, left to right. So hopefully you guys found something interesting or worthwhile through this video. Let me know if you liked anything, or like if there's anything you could help out with, if there's any wisdom you can impart in the comments. All right, thank you so much.